Hey guys, what's going on? It's Rekt Capital and welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for joining me in today's video about Bitcoin's price action through the lens of the stock to flow model. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future and let's dive right in. So here's Bitcoin's price action. It's below a now flattened out stock to flow line. And that's a far cry from what we saw a few months back when this sloping stock to flow line was rather steep. And it was quite steep as well back here. But in this 2013 cycle, you can see that the stock to flow line was a little less steep compared to now. And the reason I mentioned that is that right over here in 2013, we saw an overextension beyond the stock to flow line, which was ascending in of itself. So the bull side momentum was incredibly strong at that time. We were really outpacing this 365-day stock to flow line. And we outpaced it to such an extent that we needed to have that 80% correction to actually turn it into a support. This stock to flow line was figuring as a support. But the major difference here, apologies, is that this is a less steep line to this one. But nonetheless, in the 21 cycle here, you saw how Bitcoin's price action was actually closely following the stock to flow line. It was a very steep slope, but nonetheless, we saw perfect almost following of the stock to flow line, something Bitcoin has never really been able to do throughout its history. We've never really seen perfect following by price of the stock to flow line. And that's only a testament to this cycle. Here, of course, there was picture perfect following for a period in the stock to flow line, but over here we outpaced this incredibly steep stock to flow line as well. So we weren't really outpacing it like in 2013. So the bull side momentum in 2013 was arguably stronger. Although this is a steeper slope, close following is also a strong indication of bull side momentum. But the main point that I want to drive home here is that we're now enjoying a flattened out stock to flow line in this mid-cycle correction, and in the previous mid-cycle correction we didn't have a flat stock to flow line, and in fact we saw this stock to flow line continue to climb over the coming years. So it was rather difficult to eclipse this stock to flow line back then, but Bitcoin still did it with relative ease because the bull side momentum was so strong. And over here, we haven't been able to eclipse that. And the reason that's important is because now we might be seeing a reaccumulation range form here for Bitcoin. So the reason I mention this reaccumulation range is because this may very well be a pause, a dip, a pause in an otherwise strong uptrend, a reaccumulation range before we see the second part of the cycle, much like what we saw here. This was the first part of the cycle in 2013. After a correction, we saw the stock to flow line hold as a support, and then we saw the second part of the cycle take place, the more euphoric part of the bull market before we peaked. And bull markets tend to peak whenever we see upside deviations in Bitcoin's price action beyond the stock to flow line. And you can see that across time. And we haven't seen an upside deviation whatsoever in this current cycle, but it will be a little bit easier to upside deviate beyond the stock to flow line because it's now actually horizontal. It's not climbing now. So we'll know for a fact that at around $84,500, that's when we're going to eclipse the stock to flow line. And that's a pretty useful thing to note because when the stock to flow line was ascending, you never really knew when that stock to flow line deviation would occur. But the reason it's important to know when that deviation could occur or at which point is because whenever we deviate here, that's when the clock is going to start ticking on the Bitcoin bull market, because upside deviations mark out bull market peaks. And these bull market peaks tend to occur a certain amount beyond the stock to flow line, and it takes a certain amount of time for that peak to be achieved. So of course, once we deviate beyond here, we won't necessarily see that peak immediately, but it will take a few weeks, a few months perhaps, for that peak to occur whenever we deviate beyond this horizontal stock to flow line. So that's an interesting point because of course, upside deviations mark out bull market tops, as we can see here, and downside deviations mark out bear market bottoms. And the thing about this current accumulation here, this reaccumulation in fact, is that we haven't seen an upside deviation. We haven't seen an upside deviation throughout this entire cycle since March 2020. And in fact, we started to go sideways, much like the stock to flow line started to go sideways. So we're going sideways in tandem with the stock to flow line, which is quite interesting in of itself. But this is a reaccumulation range that will proceed further upside because this is showing many similar signs to the mid-cycle correction in 2013. The only difference here is that in 2013, the stock to flow line was holding as a support, whereas here, the stock to flow line is probably going to be a resistance. But nonetheless, there has been no upside deviation, and at the same time, by the same token, there has been no downside deviation either. And the way the stock to flow line is useful in denoting bull markets and bear markets is that once we see a deviation below the stock to flow line, we'll then see a deviation beyond the stock to flow line. We've seen this downside deviation, but no upside deviation. In fact, we're just going sideways, but once that upside deviation happens, and it will happen at some point in the future, that's when we're going to have to start paying attention to Bitcoin registering a price peak in its bull market within the span of a few, or at least several weeks to a few months. And I talk more about this in the stock to flow deviations Rekt Capital newsletter. In the Rekt Capital newsletter, I share a lot of in-depth analysis, so feel free to check out that newsletter in the link in the description down below for more insight about these upside deviations, when they might occur, and how much we could see price rally beyond the stock to flow line. But in any case, it will be time to pay attention once we get that upside deviation for reasons of just scaling out before the bull market peak hits. But this time is also time to pay attention, but for completely different reasons, because we are in a reaccumulation range. We are registering higher lows here on the weekly time frame, and it's important to pay attention right now just so that we can position ourselves in a way that we don't miss out on the second part of this cycle, which will be more euphoric than the first part of the cycle. In any case, thank you so much for watching today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Rekt Capital. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future, and of course, like the content. If you'd like to see more content like this going forward, I'll speak to you in the next one. Speak to you soon.